All right, we are going to start moving forward with some other ways of solving quadratic equations. Factoring is always, I think, the preferred method, but it does not always work. So we need to have some more tools in our toolbox, and today we're going to introduce one of them that is going to play a big part with another tool that we're going to use. Actually, a couple of tools we're going to use. So we're going to go over something today that's we're going to use this skill with a couple of the other techniques we use, and that is solving quadratic equations by using square roots. All right, now you got to think about what you know about square roots, right? What we do know about square roots is that the ones we've dealt with mostly, the ones we like, are the ones that are like, you know, oh, take the square root of 9, right? And we know that, well, that 9 is this. It's 3 times 3, right? It's the square root of 3 times 3. And it's the square root of 3 squared. So if it's the square root of 3 squared, the square root of anything squared is just that thing, right? Because the square root is what number do you multiply by itself, right? To get that, right? And so, excuse me, when we introduce this and when we start doing this, and most of the things we use it for in algebra, most of the time we're thinking, okay, 3 times 3 is 9, right? But there's another case here, and the other case is that besides 3, you can also have -3 for this, right? Because we know that -3 squared will also multiply to get you to 9. Okay, so a big thing that we're going to do today is when we're taking square roots of things is we need to account into the fact that we're going to always have a positive and negative root, right? Square root, right? A positive and negative square root. And we will use that in combination with some other stuff that's kind of thrown in to find our the solutions to our equations, to find our roots to the equations. And don't confuse that with square root, right? So, so that's kind of what we're going to work on today. The overall learning target is you're going to be able to solve quadratic equations by taking square roots. We will talk about the square root property in a moment, and solving quadratic equations with square root property, all right? And so for the purposes of this video, we're just going to do a couple simple ones, and then the next couple videos will be more examples. All right, so the square root property, all right, and this says basically what I just told you. When you take the square root of both sides of an equation, you must take both the positive and negative square root into consideration, right? You need to have both of these. And then it's got this thing. In other words, if x squared equals a, then x equals square root positive and minus. That's what that means. That means positive and not minus, negative, right? I mean, they're kind of interchangeable. I use them both, but and another way of writing this whole thing is you could write it as x equals square root of a, and then x equals the negative square root of a. I didn't write that very well, did I? So that's what that means. The reason we use this notation right here is because it saves space, right? And it's less writing. And you know we're all about trying to find ways to economize things because there's enough work involved. All right, so let's look at these two right here for the remainder of this video. Okay, so we've got this first one. It says s squared equals 196. Well, whenever you have anything squared, we know if we take the square root of it, right, then it's going to give us what we need. And so don't get confused. The positive and negative thing doesn't apply to the variable. It just applies to the number side of it, okay? So what you're going to do when you see this, right, is we've got x squared equals 196. we are going to, I'm going to erase this from here. We are going to take the square root of both sides. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root of this side, and we're going to take the square root of this side, keeping in mind that my answer that I get for this is going to be positive and negative. Okay, so I'm going to do that. So the square root of s squared is s. The square root of anything squared is that thing, right? So if you had dog squared and you took the square root of it, that would equal dog. And I know that's a really silly example, but that's how it works, right? Is if it's squared, you take the square root of it and you just get the thing that you're squaring. They kind of undo each other. They reverse each other. So s is equal to, so this gives us our positive and negative 14, because 14 times 14 is 196. Now, when we, as we move forward with this, we will also write this other ways, and we will need to write it other ways to do some manipulations with these. So another way I'd like you to get used to writing this is s is equal to, not comma, s is equal to 14, negative 14, or you could write it as s equals 14 and s equals negative 14. Those are your answers to that, okay? So we're going to put in our little thing there. Okay, we're going to get rid of the square root of dog, because that's pretty weird. All right, this next one here, b squared equals 50. It's going to be the same thing, but we got to remember some of our some of what we did when we took square roots of things. All right, so when you have a number that does not have an immediate square root, and you gotta, for the purposes of what we're going to be doing with using square roots, and we're going to be doing a lot of square roots, I would highly recommend getting strong on your square root facts. So that would be, 1 times 1 equals 1, right? 2 times 2 equals 4, 3 times 3 equals 9, and knowing all those square numbers, right? And I would go so far as to say learn them up to 20, right? Because you'll use them, and you'll use them a lot, all right? And so the reason it's helpful with something like this is two parts, right? The first part is we know that 50 doesn't have a clean square root like this, right? So what you do when you have a number that doesn't have a clean square root is you look at it and you say, can I factor this into something where one of the factors is a clean square root? And this one, you can, right? And we're going to leave this as square root of b squared here until we clean this up. And that means that with this one, we can write this as the square root of 25 times 2. Okay? And then another remembrance about working with square roots is we can split these. Right? We can split these up. Okay? These are all this is all stuff that we did in Algebra 1, and hopefully it's coming back to you. And then once you split it, you see that you've got one that you can do, and you've got one that you can't do. All right? So this is going to give us positive and negative, and then 5, because the square root of 25 is 5, right? 5 times 5 gives us 25, and we got our positive and negative, and then square root of 2. So that means this is multiplying by this to give us a number, and we leave this like this, and we don't put this in decimal form because this gives us an irrational number. It gives us a decimal that does not end. And so you could leave this like this. You could write it the other way as 5 square root of 2, comma, negative 5 square root of 2, or use the and, right? It doesn't matter. They get you to the same place. Okay, so that's how we're going to work with square roots, and that's how these things are going to roll here. All right, so jump to the next video, and we'll look at some slightly more involved problems.